What is going on, YouTube? Doomwake here, and today, as the title suggests, we are going to be discussing the modern format. Before we continue, if you enjoy this type of content, please let me know in the comments section down below. I know it's a little bit different than the gameplay that we usually do, but I would love to hear your feedback. Let me know what you thought, give a like to the video, and don't forget, please subscribe to the channel. It really does help out, and I appreciate all of you enjoying the content and all those new subscribers, so thank you very much. But with all of that said, the modern format is in a bit of an interesting spot right now. Over the past couple of weeks on Twitter, we even started trending at multiple points. There have been several discussions on the card Nadu. Everybody kind of assumes at this point that it's going to get banned. It's not really a matter of if, it's a matter of when it comes to that stupid little bird. And the data kind of shows that. If you look at the data from the Pro Tour, if you combine 4-color and Nado, it was roughly about 26% of the tournament. And then if you look at win rates, it had a pretty impressive, I think it was 58 or 59%, somewhere in that range. So yeah, at the end of the day, I think we can all agree that based on that information, and even if you just completely remove play pattern aside and time constraints and all of these things, the fact that you basically can't even play the good version on Magic Online because you just physically don't have enough time to take those clicks, I think with all of that said, Nadu at this point is basically a foregone conclusion. We all know what's going to happen. I've never seen the community come together so much on one specific topic. Usually there's a whole bunch of outliers and some people will try to defend it and things like that, but I haven't seen a single person defend Nadu, and for good reason. So that's the easy part. We can get that one out of the way pretty quickly. I don't think I'm making any hot takes on Nadu, and I don't think I'm going to lose any subscribers on it. The next two, though, that's where I might lose a couple of you folks. So the first card that I want to bring into discussion here is Grief. Now, Grief is a weird one because a lot of people over the past year and a half or so, really ever since the introduction of the Rakdos scam archetype, a lot of people have made their displeasure known when it comes to the play patterns revolving Grief, myself included. And there was a point in time where Rakdos Scam was the hands-down best deck in the format. A banning happened, Fury got the axe, and even after Fury got banned, people still tried playing Scam. Do you want to know why that's the case? Not because they're psychotic, but because Grief and Not Dead After All it's just hands down the best thing that you can be doing on turn one. The combination of make a 4/3 menace, which is a threat that kills your opponent very quickly, even if you don't have any follow-up whatsoever. The combination of make this giant threat, take your opponent's two best cards, whether that's either a card advantage card to help them dig out from their effective now forced mulligan to 5, or their answer to your 4/3 menace. And sometimes that by itself is good enough to win the game. Like, I've definitely won games, and I'm sure you have too, where you Grief, you Not Dead, and your opponent just doesn't draw another removal spell, and they just die 5 turns later. It actually kills them relatively quickly based on losing their best 2 cards. So I think the combination of pressure plus disruption is really what gets me about Grief. Like, when you really think about it, it is forcing your opponent to mulligan to 5. The great part about Magic is you get to decide whether you want to keep your opening hand or not. But when you're playing against Grief, you don't really have that choice. You keep a 7-card hand, they Grief 2 of them, boom, you've now mulliganed to 5. And God forbid you actually take a real mulligan and then get double Grief. What are you supposed to do at that point? You likely have 1 spell and 3 lands, because you probably, on your mulligan, you probably kept 3 lands, 3 spells, or maybe you got lucky and kept 2 lands, 2 spells, but they took your 2 removal spells. What 2 spells are you supposed to play on with 2 lands at that point? Now, I get there's definitely some counterplay, right? You could Graveyard Hate against Not Dead After All, or Malakir Rebirth. Urza Saga is quite good against the card Grief itself, and people love to cite a lot of these arguments when it comes to, oh, well, just put card X in your deck or card Y. And I understand that. I get that sentiment. I understand that argument. The problem for me is that the gameplay, it's just not good. Is that an enjoyable experience for anybody involved? I mean, sure, I guess the person casting the double Grief is feeling pretty good about themselves, but the person on the other side, it's like, well, I just got my 2 best cards Thoughtseized, and what really irritates me about Grief is it's forcing people into a low resource battle. That's not always the worst thing. I think that if grief was just, say, you discard a card, and then if I rebuy the grief, you discard another card, and the creature itself was a 1/1, or an O2, or for whatever reason it just died at the end of turn, it sacrificed itself even after you got it back. If it just wasn't a threat on the battlefield, we would be having a much different conversation, where forcing people into low resource battles is a tried and true strategy. That's just what Jund used to do. A lot of people like to akin this to, oh, but what if I just Thoughtseize you and then Thoughtseize you again and play a Tarmogoyf? Well, it's just not the same thing, because that's not happening on turn 1 of the game. You can't play the Tarmogoyf until turn 3 after your double Thoughtseize, so it's not really a good argument there. But just the combination of forcing players into low resource battles and just having this giant threat on turn 1 is, I think, causing the format to build around one specific card, and that next card is a card that I want to discuss. If you haven't figured it out by now, we're going to talk about the One Ring. Now, again, a lot of this leads into Grief, where Grief is very, very good. One of the best ways to combat Grief is heavy card advantage cards. Urza Saga, the One Ring. You get the idea, where it's like that is the best way to fight against Grief, is that if you've had your entire hand stripped away, put a bunch of cards in your deck that are very good top decks, and as it turns out, the One Ring is probably the single best top deck in the entire format. With the amount of people that are currently playing Grief, to give you a little bit of detail here, the Ring was in 47% of PT decks. That's almost half. That is half of the decks in the tournament playing this card. And for some reason, nobody was talking about it. Everybody is talking about Nadu this and Nadu that. But the One Ring is the most played card in the entire tournament, and it was by quite a substantial margin. Now, you might ask yourself, well, just because a card is played doesn't necessarily mean that it should be banned, and I don't disagree with that. But let's talk to some play patterns here. A lot of people like to use the argument of, well, it's a 4-mana sorcery. If you're spending 4 mana, it has to be good. Well, I think we've crossed the line on being good for 4 mana. This thing comes into play. It gives you protection until your next turn. Typically with expensive card advantage cards like Jace the Mind Sculptor, Teferi Hero of Dominaria to a lesser extent, all these expensive cards that generate card advantage, that these cards have been played in the past in Modern. I know, believe it or not, Teferi Hero of Dominaria was played at one point. The issue with these cards is you are very likely to die the turn that you cast them. The One Ring doesn't have that. It literally says on the card, you gain protection from everything until your next turn. And when I say everything, I do mean everything. It mitigates the downside that you would normally have with these expensive 4-mana cards. Now, that necessarily itself might not be a huge issue. Funny enough, I actually think the reason the card is broken or problematic is because it's legendary. Like, for example, if it wasn't legendary and you had to keep the old ones in play that had the burden counters and you couldn't reset them, I don't think we'd be having this conversation. But the combination of 4 mana with what is an effective time walk, because you're buying yourself that extra turn guaranteed, you're not going to die, and the combination of at minimum 3 cards, because you tap it the first turn you play it, untap, tap 2 more. That's 3 cards and a time walk for 4 mana. That's really powerful. Another big issue that you get because the One Ring is legendary is you get to these decks that try to loop it. There are decks that people play where their only goal, well, not their only goal, but realistically their main goal, because their deck is just like 56 random cards and for the One Ring, is they are trying to get to a spot in the game where they have a ring and either a 6 or an Emery or some way to rebuy it. They just get to loop the ring every single turn, and every time they say go, they just always have this protection shield. Now, let's talk a little bit about cards that are good against the One Ring, because they do exist, right? There's Bone Crusher Giant? Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, okay, understandably so. That was me more so just joking. There's Counterspell, Spell Pierce, Force Negation, and, it is an expensive card. I get that. I think this is probably the single most contentious card because a lot of people want to have their arguments for it and things like that. But the combination of I cast this card, the entire game is now revolving around this one specific game piece, and the person who is playing against the One Ring doesn't really have a lot of onus once the ring has resolved. It's like, okay, well, I need to kill you as quickly as possible because every turn that goes by is an extra 3 cards, an extra 4 cards, and it's just impossible for any sort of non-linear combo deck to be able to beat that sort of card advantage once it happens. The downside is, of course, that it costs 4 mana, but once you have it in play, it mitigates the downside that you would normally have to cast those 4 mana expensive cards. So, yeah, I don't know. I really do think that the format would be better off without the One Ring, Grief, and Nadu. Nadu we can all agree on. Grief, maybe there are some truthers out there, but the One Ring is where I probably are going to lose a lot of you. But yeah, that is pretty much my thoughts on the current situation. I would love to hear your thoughts. Let me know what you think about the ban list. Let me know ban list hot takes. And that's pretty much it for today's video. So if you enjoyed the video, please let me know what you thought in the comment section down below. Like, subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one. Adios.